Meredith Purcell, who had been working the front counter at Haskell Farm and Feed in Haskell County, Texas, for going on 14 years, said later that she almost didn't go get the manager. The boy who came in that Tuesday morning in February of 2011 was carrying paper grocery bags, and he looked about 16. Which he was. And she had a general policy about not interrupting Dwight unless something required it. He was in the back office with the invoices from a seed order that had come in short, and she'd already been in there once that morning about a price question on a bag of mineral supplement, and she didn't want to be in there again for something that turned out to be nothing. She looked at the bags. She looked at the boy. He wasn't nervous, was the thing. He just stood there in his Carhartt jacket and his good boots, the ones he'd clearly put on because he was trying to make a good impression, and he waited. He didn't look around the store. He didn't fidget. He just stood with his bags on the counter and waited for whatever was going to happen next. Something made her go get Dwight anyway. She said she didn't know what it was exactly. She just knew it was something. There's a kind of person who sees what a thing actually is rather than what it looks like. They don't argue about it. They don't explain themselves. They just do the work and wait. If you know somebody like that, if you grew up around somebody like that, this channel is for you. Hit subscribe before we go any further. There's more where this came from. It was the second Tuesday of February 2011, about 9:30 in the morning. The temperature in Haskell County had been running below freezing since before dawn, and the sky was a flat, even gray that had been sitting over that part of West Texas for 2 days. The kind of winter day where the light doesn't change from 7 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon, just stays the same pale white and makes the mesquite flats look like a photograph of themselves. Haskell County sits on the rolling plains, flat to rolling, red clay and caliche underneath. The kind of country that is harder to work than it looks and produces people who are harder than they look for the same reason. The store smelled like molasses and mineral block, and the kind of dust that accumulates in a building where sacked feed comes and goes. There were 3 other customers in the store that morning. A cattleman named Glenn Burke, who was buying wormer and didn't look up from the bottle he was reading. A woman, Meredith, didn't know who was asking about fence staples. And a man in an orange vest who had come in for dog food and was taking his time about it. None of them paid any attention to the boy with the grocery bags. The bed of the Ford Ranger in the parking lot, a 1999 dark blue, one taillight held on with electrical tape, had about 4 inches of snow on it that nobody had swept off. The drive from Jones County had taken 40 minutes on roads that were icy in the low spots. Cody Pruitt had driven it by himself, which he was legally allowed to do in Texas at 16 with a restricted license. And he had rehearsed in his head what he was going to say somewhere around the Haskell County line. Inside those grocery bags was 31 pounds of hardwood lump charcoal. Cedar and post oak, locally sourced, burned in a retort Cody had built himself in the machine shed behind his grandmother's house, about 12 miles south of Abilene. He had $7 in his wallet. He owed his grandmother $40 for the steel drum she'd let him buy off a man in Anson. He had driven 34 miles to Haskell Farm and Feed because it was the 3rd feed store he'd tried that month, and the first 2 had said no. Dwight Haller had been managing Haskell Farm and Feed for 11 years. He was not the kind of man who got excited about things, and he was not the kind of man who got irritated when his morning got interrupted, which is a rarer combination than it sounds. He came out from the back office drying his hands on a shop rag, and he looked at the bags on the counter, and he looked at Cody Pruitt, and he said, "What have you got?" Cody told him. Local hardwood lump, cedar and post oak, 31 pounds. He'd have told Dwight more, but he'd learned at the first 2 stores that less was better at the beginning. Dwight didn't say anything. He opened one of the bags and reached in and pulled out a piece and turned it over in his hand. He knocked it against the counter edge twice, a flat, clean sound. He held it up to the light from the window over the seed display. He smelt it, actually lifted it to his nose and breathed in, the way you check a piece of meat, not the way you're being polite. He set that piece on the counter. He opened the second bag and pulled out another piece, and did it again. Then he opened the third bag. Meredith Purcell had not gone back to the office. She was pretending to arrange something on a shelf near the register. Glenn Burke looked up from the Wormer bottle. He looked at the bags and went back to reading. Dwight set the third piece down next to the first two. He looked at them for a moment. "What are you asking?" he said. $2.50 a pound, Cody said. Dwight worked the math on 31 pounds at $2.50 without writing anything down. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Where are you getting your wood?" "Estate sales mostly," Cody said. "Old fence posts. Some salvaged lumber if the species is right." "What species?" "Cedar and post oak, mainly. I've got some black locust in the last batch." Dwight picked up one of the pieces again. He turned it over once and set it back down. "You make all of this yourself," he said. "Yes, sir." "How?" Byrne retorted. Cody said. 55-gallon drum inside a larger chamber. Secondary combustion setup. Dwight looked at him. He looked at the charcoal on the counter. He had stocked 2 brands of bagged charcoal from a distributor out of Lubbock for the past 6 years, and both of them had gotten worse in the last 2. He knew what good lump looked like, and he knew what it smelled like, and he knew that what was on his counter was neither of those brands. He was not going to be made a fool of by a 16-year-old, but he also was not going to turn down 31 pounds of good local lump because the person selling it wasn't old enough to vote. "I'll take it," he said. "Bring me more when it moves." He didn't say if. He said when. It moved in 8 days. The story of how Cody Pruitt got to that counter on a cold Tuesday morning in February starts about 2 years earlier, in a pasture in Jones County, with a fence that had been coming down since 2006, and an old man who had been meaning to deal with it since about the same time. It also starts in a different way, with 3 estate sales in the fall of 2010. And a boy who stood at the edge of each one, doing something that none of the dealers from Abilene had any particular reason to notice. At the first sale, a farm dispersal in Anson Jones County, October 9th, Cody stood for 6 minutes next to a pile of downed cedar posts that the auctioneer's crew had stacked near the road. He picked up 4 of them. He smelled the end grain on each one. He pressed his thumbnail into the wood on the underside of each one, the side that had been facing down in the pile, away from weather. He put 3 of them back and set one aside. He paid $7 for a lot that included that post and 11 others, and a section of rusted pipe. He loaded it in the Ranger by himself. At the second sale, in November, he did the same thing. Shorter stops this time. He knew what he was looking for. At the third sale, he found the pile that was worth something. 41 posts, mostly cedar, some post oak mixed in at the bottom, been lying in a field ditch for 2 or 3 years by the look of them. He paid $9. He loaded the Ranger until it was sitting low on the rear springs and left the rest, tied a strip of orange flagging to mark them, and came back the next Saturday for the remainder. Nobody at any of those 3 sales paid much attention to him. He was a teenager with a truck and an orange flagging strip. He was not interesting. Harold Pruitt, Cody's grandfather on his father's side, though by the time this story starts his son hadn't been around for 4 years, ran a small spread in Jones County, about 180 acres of mesquite and caliche, a few dozen cattle, a hay meadow that did better some years than others. Harold was 71 years old in 2009, and he moved the way men move when their knees and one hip have been telling them things for a decade. He still did his own feeding. He still pulled his own calves in March. What he didn't do anymore was fencing. The east fence had been failing in sections since the late 90s. A dip in the ground that drained poorly had been wicking moisture up into the cedar posts for years, and by 2009, 3 sections had gone down entirely, and another 8 were leaning at angles that would have embarrassed a younger version of Harold Pruitt considerably. The posts themselves were a mix of old-growth eastern red cedar cut from the river bottom in the 1970s, and some replacement posts from the early 90s that had proven, as Harold put it once to nobody in particular, to be not worth the trouble it took to set them. Cody had been spending summers and school breaks with his grandmother, Laureen Pruitt, since he was 9. He helped Harold with what Harold would let him help with, which was an expanding category as Harold got older, and a shrinking category as Harold got more particular about how things got done. Cody learned to drive a tractor at 10. He learned to pull wire at 11. He learned, somewhere around 12, to stop asking Harold questions when Harold was in the middle of figuring something out, and to just watch instead. Harold Pruitt had a way of thinking out loud that wasn't exactly talking. He'd be standing in front of something, a downed post, a sick heifer, a piece of equipment that was running wrong, and he'd start narrating under his breath, just fragments, not full sentences, the way a man does when the thinking is happening faster than the words. Cody had spent 3 or 4 summers listening to those fragments without understanding most of them. By the time he was 13, he was starting to understand. The downed fence posts on the east line were what Harold had been narrating about, off and on, for 2 years. The problem wasn't clearing them. Cody could have done that in a weekend. The problem, as Harold kept returning to, was that they were worth something, and Harold hadn't figured out what yet. Eastern red cedar, Harold explained one evening in the machine shed, doesn't rot from the inside. It rots from the surface, from the soil contact and the weather, and it can look destroyed from the outside and still be solid heartwood all the way to the core. The oil in the wood, the same oil that made cedar chests and cedar closets, was what preserved it. Harold had a cedar chest in the bedroom that was 50 years old and still smelled like new wood inside. That oil didn't leave just because the post got wet. You just had to know how to get past the rotted layer. He told Cody about a man named Lester Van who had operated a small charcoal-making operation in Shackelford County in the 1980s. Lester had built his own retort from a repurposed propane tank and a 55-gallon drum, and had sold to feed stores and to a small restaurant supply company out of Abilene. He'd done it for about 11 years before he retired, and the operation died with his interest in it. Harold had bought charcoal from Lester twice for smoking meat, and had thought about the operation many times since. He'd never built a retort himself. He'd meant to. He never did. He told Cody the weight ratio. 5 pounds of green wood into the burn produced roughly 1 pound of finished charcoal. Old-growth cedar, dry, ran heavier. Moisture content mattered more than anything else. Wet wood made weak charcoal that crumbled. The fence posts that had been lying on the ground, not buried, had been drying for 3 years. They were as close to ideal as you were likely to find at an estate sale for $5 a pile. Cody listened to all of this over the course of 2 summers. He wrote some of it down in a spiral notebook, the green-covered kind with the cardboard back. He asked Harold in the fall of 2010 if he could have the downed posts from the east fence to use as feedstock. Harold said he didn't see why not. He said that like it was a small thing. It wasn't. The retort took Cody 4 weekends to build, working mostly on Saturdays while Harold watched from a lawn chair set on the concrete apron of the machine shed. Harold didn't say much while Cody worked. He said something when something was going to be wrong before it got worse, which was the most useful version of supervision Cody ever encountered in his life. The design was a secondary combustion setup. One drum nested inside a larger burn chamber that Harold had sketched on a piece of cardboard based on what he remembered of Lester Van's unit. The sketch had 4 question marks on it. 3 of them Cody answered by trial. One of them turned out not to matter. The first 2 burns produced charcoal that was inconsistent. The second burn produced 18 pounds that were good enough. Cody spent a Saturday afternoon bagging it in used paper grocery bags he'd saved from Lorene's kitchen, and he drove to the first feed store, which said they had a supplier. He drove to the second, which said the same thing. He drove to Haskell Farm and Feed on a Tuesday morning in February, and he put the bags on the counter in front of Meredith Purcell and waited. Dwight Haller called Lorene Pruitt's landline 8 days after that first sale. Lorene passed the message to Cody that evening at dinner. Harold was sitting at the other end of the table. He didn't say anything. He poured a little more coffee and looked out the window at the dark. By April of 2011, Cody was running 1 burn a week out of the machine shed, sourcing wood from Harold's fence posts and from 2 estate sales he'd attended in Jones and Haskell counties in March. He paid $8 for a lot of mixed cedar at the Jones County sale, and $6 for another at a farm dispersal outside Rule. He was generating between 22 and 30 pounds per burn, selling at $2. 50 a pound to Dwight at Haskell Farm and Feed, and clearing somewhere around $170 to $210 a month after materials. He was 16 years old and had never held a job, unless you counted the summers of baling hay for Harold for room and board, which Harold had not counted and Cody had not argued about. Harold Pruitt died in July of 2012. He was 74. He died on a Sunday morning, in bed, which was the way he'd said he wanted to go, and which was the way he went. Cody was there. He'd been spending that summer at the farm the same as every other summer, and he'd known since about May that the summer wasn't going to be like the others. He kept running burns through that fall. He didn't think much about stopping. He thought about stopping once, in October, standing in the machine shed in the cold with the drum cooling down and nobody in the lawn chair, and the whole thing feeling like a question he didn't have an answer to yet. Then, he thought about the cardboard sketch with 4 question marks on it. 3 of them he'd answered. The 4th one turned out not to matter. He got back to work. Dwight Haller called in the spring of 2013 to say he wanted a regular weekly order, not if and when, a standing order. Cody wrote it in the green-covered notebook on the first page that was still blank. $2, 50 a pound, 25 pounds per week, pickup on Tuesdays. By 2014, he was selling to 3 feed stores in Jones, Haskell, and Throckmorton counties, which meant 3 weekly deliveries and about 70 pounds of finished charcoal a week coming out of the machine shed. He had sourced wood from 11 estate sales by then, ranging from Jones County east to Shackelford County, and had developed a reliable sense of what a pile was worth at a glance. He rarely paid more than $10. He never paid more than $20. He knew which auctioneers ran a tighter sale and adjusted his arrival time accordingly. He added a restaurant account in Abilene that same year, a barbecue place on North First that did brisket over Post Oak and had been complaining for 2 years that their lump supplier was inconsistent. The pitmaster, a compact man named Terrence, who had been smoking meat in Abilene since 1997, asked Cody to bring a sample of the cedar blend. He burned it in the firebox on a Friday afternoon with no meat over it, just to check the smoke. He stood and watched it for a while. He called Cody that evening and said he wanted whatever Cody could bring him on a weekly basis. Cedar gave a smoke flavor that some pitmasters considered too assertive and some considered ideal. Terrence was in the second category. That account ran for 9 years, until Terrence retired and sold the place in 2023 to a couple from Austin who switched to a commercial supplier. Cody wished them well. They called him back 4 months later. Cody Pruitt is 30 now. He runs a charcoal production operation out of a leased metal building in Jones County, 800 square feet, 3 retorts, 1 original. 2 he had built to his own design by a welder named Santos in Anson. His primary raw material comes from estate sales and from fence contractors who call him when they're clearing old cedar. He doesn't have to look for wood much anymore. Word found the people who had it. He has a website, which his girlfriend built, and which gets him about a quarter of his new accounts. The rest come by phone. He charges $3, 10 a pound wholesale. He has never raised his price by more than a quarter at a time, which is a principle he got from Harold about a different kind of business and applied to this one because it seemed like the same principle underneath. The Ranger gave out in 2019 with 241,000 miles on it. He drives a 2017 F-250 now. Dark blue. Both taillights intact. Meredith Purcell retired from Haskell Farm and Feed in 2022. She still tells the story of the boy with the grocery bags. She tells it at the right length, which is short, because the part that matters is the part where she almost didn't go get Dwight. Lorene Pruitt still lives on the Jones County property. She is 83. She keeps a bag of Cody's charcoal in the pantry because she likes the smell of it. She says it smells like the cedar chest in the bedroom, which was Harold's mother's, which is still there, which still smells like new wood inside after 60 years. There is a thing about knowledge that Harold Pruitt understood and never quite said directly, that it isn't yours until you've worked it with your hands. He could have told Cody everything Lester Van told him, and it wouldn't have meant much. He could have built the retort himself 30 years earlier and sold charcoal for a decade. He didn't. He waited until there was someone to hand it to, and then he handed it in pieces, the way you do when you want the other person to own what they're learning. Cody Pruitt still has the spiral notebook. Green cover, cardboard back. His own handwriting inside, which got smaller and more careful as the summers went on. He doesn't look at it much. He knows what it says.